Dagamaya Tamaso Maham Jyotirgamaya Mrityurmam Amritam Gamaya Ahavir Maehi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukha Te Namaham Pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is, what is spirituality? And we're going to be talking about being concerned with the human spirit as opposed to physical and material things. We can define the spirit as the immaterial part of ourselves that transcends the body and the mind. That is our self, more interior than our senses, than our thoughts, our feelings, our persona, our self-image. The spirit is our self. It's the reference of the first person, personal pronoun, I. It's our consciousness. It's our life spirit. It's the soul within us. It is the divinity within us. This is our self. This is the spirit. The spirit is your consciousness. The spirit, that is yourself, is the subject. It's not the object. In the great tradition of the Sankhya philosophy, you know how they analyze the whole of reality into 25 cosmic principles. And then just to make it easy, they boil it down to 2. And that is Prakriti and Purusha, nature and consciousness. And by nature, they don't mean wilderness areas or the national parks. They really mean the sum total of all matter and energy in the gross, in the subtle, in the causal realms, in the macrocosm, and in the microcosm. And over and apart from this nature, that is, we could say all of nature is made up of Prakriti. Prakriti is just stuff. The whole universe, including our bodies and minds, is all just stuff. And apart from that is our spirit, our soul, our self, our consciousness. Now, consciousness, that means our self, our spirit, is like a light. That is, the spirit is the divinity within us. Divinity, the word divinity just means light being, or light beings. Our consciousness is like light. If you read there in the Panchadashi, you know, there's a chapter in the Panchadashi called the lamp in the theater. And we can visualize a theater with a stage, and there's a lamp that's burning up on the ceiling. And all of the audience comes in, and they seat themselves, and the music starts, and the curtains open, and then the play begins on stage. During all of that activity, the lamp in the theater just shines. Its light goes out, and it touches everything. It touches every person in the audience. It touches everyone on the stage. It illumines the whole theater. It makes everything that's happening as possible in that light. It's intimately revealing everything around it. And yet, it is detached. It doesn't think. Your consciousness, we're talking about your spirit, doesn't think. It doesn't feel. It doesn't act. Doesn't move. It's just like the lamp in the theater that continues to shine. This is your spirit. This is your consciousness. This is your self. Your conscious self is like space. Space is infinite. However far we travel in space, there's no line there. There's no boundary beyond which, what's beyond that is there's more space. The space is infinite, and space, as we know, is, well, it can't be divided up. You may have an open field out in the middle of nowhere. People come there, and maybe they build a house. And then they walk in the house, and they say, this is the inside, this is the outside. But the space was never divided. The space pervades what's the inside and the outside. It's not finite. There's no threshold. There's no crossing. At space, because there's no parts to space. There's no parts to your consciousness. Your consciousness can't be divided. That means it can't be cut. It can't be changed. That's why you are immortal. Because in order to be immortal, if you're a composite being, then you can be disassembled, maybe. You can be disintegrated. But if you have no parts, if you're one only without a second, then you're immortal. And that's the nature of the self. That is your consciousness. That is your spirit. It is one only without a second. It's infinite. And because there is only one consciousness, there's nothing outside that can disturb it or make it move. And therefore, the spirit is very still. The spirit, we could say, your spiritual consciousness is stillness. And this is your true nature. Now, this is what we read in the scriptures of the Vedanta philosophy. And we cannot help but have a positive affirmational response to the idea that I am infinite and that I am completely one with everything. And yet, we know, too, that sometimes we don't feel that way. In fact, we feel quite different. We feel as if we're very finite, very limited, and our minds are always in turmoil. And this is because we're distanced from our true self. We're distanced from our own nature. That is, we're alienated from our own spirit, from the spirit. And it seems to be counterintuitive. And yet, we cannot help but think that we're different from this, our higher self. It's almost like there are two selves within us. There's myself, the lower self, and my real self. Now, as to that, there's a famous story in the Upanishads, in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, and also in the Mundaka Upanishad, the 5th chapter, where it tells about the story of the spirit bird. Now, if you can visualize a forest, maybe in ancient times, and there through the forest, the great trees everywhere, and there's one particular tree. As we look along, we can see that we look up into those higher tiers and tiers of branches of the tree, that on that tree there are two birds. They're perched on the self-same tree, but one is on the lower branches, and the other is on the topmost branch. So apparently there are two birds on this tree. As we look more closely, we can see that the lower bird is hopping around and is looking for sweet fruits. Occasionally it finds a sweet fruit, it eats that, and finds some enjoyment. But then it gets a bitter fruit, and it's very disgusted. And it stops there, and it happens to look up the tree. And there, way up on the tree, high up on those branches, it sees the higher bird seated there calmly, quietly, without eating. That bird sitting in his own majesty high above there in the forest. The lower bird looks up and he sees, yes, that's my ideal. I wish I could be calm like that, but then he forgets and gets distracted and begins to seek out those sweet fruits. He eats one sweet fruit, another, then he gets another particularly bitter fruit. Stops, thinks twice, looks up the tree, sees that higher bird, gets inspired, hops up one branch, two branches, then gets distracted, forgets again. And like that, time passes. And little by little, that lower bird ascends the branches of the tree. And as he gets up near the top, he begins to look more and more at that idealized, calm, quiet bird at the very top, until he becomes kind of mesmerized, spellbound. And with this vision in mind, he hops up the last few branches. And then a surprising thing happens. The lower bird merges into, becomes one with the higher bird. And you know how, in a forest sometimes, if you walk through the trees and the leaves, maybe a breeze is blowing, and the sun is shining, and there's a play of shadows in the leaves of the shifting leaves of the trees. And sometimes there's kind of illusions appear in those leaves. And so similarly it is here in this story. That lower bird was really appeared to be something separate. And yet there was really only one bird all along. Now that's a famous analogy. Let's call it a story, because really it has two characters. It has a setting, it has a narrative, it has a complication, a climax, denouement. It's a whole cycle. It's the story of ourselves. That's our story. That's our condition. That's the whole of, if we want to think about spirituality, we can't do much better than think about this story from the Upanishads. This is what spirituality is all about. Now let's look here first at the lower bird. The lower bird is the Jivatma, that is, the embodied self. Atma here means the Atman is your true self. It's used in many different ways in Vedanta. The Jivatma is your embodied self. That is, it's your own conventional, walking around everyday self. It is yourself, identified with the physical body, made up of the 5 elements, identified also with the senses and with the functions and the faculties of the mind, which are the subtle body, and interior to that also the causal body. All of this together, it makes up the character of our lower self. This is our self. And we spend our life, well, our goal and purpose of ourself. What is our goal? What is our purpose? Well, our purpose is happiness. Our purpose is to find happiness in this world. And by happiness, of course, what we mean is satisfaction of our desires. What we mean is ego gratification. What we mean is fulfillment of our own ego self. That means that is our self, indexed to and identified with the body and the mind. We pursue happiness. Happiness is not our goal in spiritual life. Our goal is knowledge. But the lower bird pursues happiness. And in seeking out his happiness, he eats the sweet and occasionally the bitter fruits. And as a result of which, every time he has a sweet or a bitter experience, it leaves an impression in the mind, that is in the psyche. Whole character is changed by every action that we do. And thus we lay down a whole these are the psychodynamics of the great law of karma, and how gradually we build tendencies and habits and dispositions that are the cause of this is why we're born. The lower self, that is the lower bird, is born. He lives and he dies. And then he is reborn again, according to his driven by his own karma. And in this way is caught up in the great wheel of reincarnation, the great round of samsara. And he suffers. This is the world of suffering. This is the lower branches. Let's look at the higher bird. The higher bird symbolizes your true self. That is yourself, which is your spirit. That's your spiritual self. We have some redundancy there. We have a spiritual self-consciousness. It's your spiritual self-consciousness. That is yourself. And sometimes maybe it gets confusing in Vedanta when we talk here about selves, We have the lower self, the small s. Then there's the higher self, the big S. And then there's the Atma, there's the Jivatma, the body itself. Then there's the Shuddhatma, the higher self. Then there's the body self, the Annamaya Atma. Then there's the Pranamaya Atma. Then we got the Manomaya Atma, Vijnanamaya Atma. These are all these different selves. So maybe it can become a little confusing to our mind, but we can just forget about all that. Because really, there's only one self. And that is yourself. That's your consciousness. That's the higher bird. The higher bird, you can say, is yourself when you have realized your true nature. Then you can abide as the witness of your own sattvic mind. Having realized your true self, you're like that higher bird, calm, quiet, fulfilled, having viveka, that is discrimination, the spirit of renunciation, having all the good embodiment of all spiritual qualities, feeling the joy within yourself, having achieved self-fulfillment, and feeling empathy and compassion for all beings. This is your enlightened self. This is your true nature. Vedanta says, gives us this vision of our true nature. And so now our subject this morning was, what is spirituality? Spirituality, of course, is a very abstract noun. It's a word like authenticity, or rationality, or morality, or religiosity, or divinity. And what we want to do is we want to embrace our own spirituality and our own divinity. And Swami Vivekananda, we read there in the Raja Yoga, where he kind of summarizes the teachings of Vedanta when he says each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest your divinity within by controlling nature. Nature means Prakriti. The divinity within is yourself, your own consciousness, your own spiritual nature. So we want to develop spirituality then. It's about developing our own spiritual nature. We could say it's about raising our consciousness, expanding our consciousness. Do this, and then he begins to outline, how do we do this? Well, we do this by the practice of different forms of yoga sadhana, that is spiritual practice. And as we begin to do spiritual practices, we're like the lower bird. What are we doing? What we're doing is we're hopping up the tree. Spirituality just means is that you're hopping up the tree, you're making progress towards being who you really are. And as we and so we visualize that bird from the different tiers of the branches. As we evolve, we know how well, in developmental psychology, we know the different stages of ego development, and then it's the mature self. We go through different stages. That is, we become more and more mature. Mature means, what does mature mean? It means is we become more older and wiser. That is, we become more objective. We become more detached. And all the things that were of such interest, intense distraction in our earlier life, they're no longer, we've lost interest in them. We've objectified That is, we become a higher. So the lower self identities have become now the object of our higher self identity. And so we are more detached. And as the bird hops up the tree, not only is he elevating his self, he's elevating his self-consciousness, but he's also moving gradually inward towards the axis of the tree. Now we could say maybe the tree is like the body. He's moving more towards the central interior of the body, that is becoming more centered, becoming more balanced. And as he rises up and does spiritual practice, which gives you, the whole point of spiritual practice is to dehypnotize yourself, your higher self, from your lower self. That's all it is. To detach yourself from your illusions, to objectify your illusions. That's what all spiritual sadhana is, just like that. It serves that purpose. It enables us to begin to rise above the conflicts of life and the inner conflicts within us. This is why we feel unfulfilled and uneasy within ourselves, even though we're eminently successful, because you have internal conflicts. But as the bird hops up, as you yourself, your consciousness becomes more and more detached, those conflicts, they resolve themselves. And office politics, people quarrel. Which desk? One clerk wants to have one desk, another clerk wants to have another desk. Well, if one of those clerks is promoted to be the manager of the office, that conflict disappears. He's no longer interested in that conflict. He's risen above it. So doing spiritual practice, each soul is potentially divine. How do we manifesting that divinity within? By doing spiritual practice, and as such, as doing that, we elevate our consciousness. That means we go from lower vibration to the whole level, spiritual vibrations. Go to 0 from 1,000. So we're going to go up 100, 200, 300 as we go up higher, up to the 600, 700. These are spiritual, higher vibrational levels that are indications of our spirit that become manifest automatically. Spiritual virtues become manifest automatically as we disengage our consciousness from our attachments. So, our question here is, what is spirituality? Now, the two birds example that's a good model for us. But let's look more deeply more in detail of what we mean by that word, very abstract word, spiritual. Causes a lot of confusion. What is spiritual? And we can contrast the spirituality by, sometimes it's helpful to, when we're dealing with these abstract words, to understand them more clearly by contrasting them with the opposite idea. And the opposite of spirituality is worldliness. Now, you read a lot in the gospel and in spiritual literature about the world, the worldly man, worldliness. This is religious language. In our common parlance, when we talk about a worldly man, what we mean a cosmopolitan man, somebody who is at ease wherever he goes, who knows his way around in any culture. That would what we call a worldly man. But that's not what it means in religious language. Worldly in religious language refers to the mentality of our lower self, that is, our self when the worldly man is sense-bound, is earth-bound, is materialistic, is selfish, is self-serving, is preoccupied with fulfilling lower chakra energy needs of the lower chakras, is in pursuit of sense objects and ego gratification. This is the worldly man. That's worldliness. Now, the opposite of the worldly man is the otherworldly man. Now, the otherworldly man, well, maybe if we read in Christian mysticism, we visualize a saint, an ascetic, living in the desert, living in a cave, doing austerities. But we could as well speak in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, contrast the worldly man with the devotee, that is the real devotee, who is in the world but is not of it, and who does his daily activities, but his mind is fixed on God. God just means the Spirit. The Spirit just means your true nature, your higher nature. So the spiritual person is a person, the otherworldly, that is, who lives, is interested in the Platonic world of universals. That means those things, interested in things which are eternal, unchanging, immutable, and archetypal forms, rather than the changing and the particular of the lower world. So, helpful for us to understand spirituality, we can contrast it with worldliness. So too, we can think about, when we're talking here about Christian mysticism, one of the common themes is they speak of spirituality as a war, as a battle between the spirit and the flesh. The spirit and the flesh, these are our enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil. Now, by the flesh here, St. Paul, in the Bible, the book of St. Luke, he's talking there not about our actual flesh and blood physical body, but he's referring to the desires which are characteristic and which emerge from our identity with our lower self. And it's those desires that we have in life which are ungodly, which are self-serving, and which don't serve our higher values, which drag our mind down and out. These are lower desires. Our ideal, the highest ideal would be to be the self, which is desireless. But we can't do that as long as we are embodied souls. But we can get to higher and higher motives. That is, graduate to higher and higher objects of desire. And the first thing that we need to renounce are those objects for those desires which are frivolous, self-serving, and self-indulgent, and unnecessary, and that don't help us, and that makes our lives miserable. Those are the first things that we need to work on when we talk about reducing those desires. So the spirit and the flesh regarded, meanwhile, the ideal of the ancient Christian mysticism. If you read there in the lives, by the way, it's not that the lower mind, say it's a warfare, a spiritual warfare, battle. You say the lower mind is not our enemy. The lower mind, however, maybe it is, because in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, Sri Krishna there says that the mind is your own best friend and your own worst enemy. So if your mind is out of control, it is your enemy, and full of false beliefs and false ideas, and well, let's compare it to a naughty child. Your lower mind, that is the manas, Sanskrit is called the lower mind, that is the emotion-driven mind, vision by our vasanas, is like a naughty child, a spoiled child. Not evil, but needs some discipline, needs some structure. And this was the attitude of, for example, the Desert Fathers, and they read in Christian mysticism. Their ideal was to walk in the Spirit. That's what spirituality means, walking in the Spirit. And their ideal was to live like an angel. Live like an angel? An angel doesn't have to eat, doesn't have to drink anything, doesn't have to sleep. So they moved out in the desert, and that's how they tried to live in such great austerity. And, well, maybe that's an extreme idea of Christian mysticism, but it's an ideal. It gives us a feeling of what is spirituality, divorced from rising above. Like a wise, let's say like a wise father, a wise parent, using the lower powers of our psyche to serve the higher. So we can help clarify a little bit of this idea of what is spirituality by contrasting it with its opposites. Now let's look a little bit about, it will be helpful for us to disambiguate some terms that are often confused, synonyms that are often used, words that are often used synonymously in indiscriminate speech, but really as spiritual aspirants, which were good for us to distinguish. And this will help us to understand what is spirituality. Let's contrast the words first, two words. Religion and spirituality. These are two, let's look here at the difference. By religion, well, we think of a set of doctrines and beliefs associated with some supernatural God in heaven. And usually our religion, the major religions, embodied in some organized institution, and that the body of believers in that religion will meet in a church, maybe on Sunday morning. And it's all very social. They'll have congregational singing, communal prayer, and they'll listen to a sermon, which they're exhorted to do good works, to be good, to do the right thing, and their ideal, really, of that's a religious person. I give you stereotypical religion, that's a religion. What we commonly mean by religion is someone who seeks their salvation after death will depend on faith and good works. Now, spirituality does not require that you belong to a church. It doesn't require that you believe in God. It doesn't require that you have childlike faith, or that you do good works. Spirituality is a very personal thing. It's about you, but the relationship between yourself and yourself, between your lower self and your higher self, between you and your higher power, between you and the divinity within you. That's what spirituality you can practice just in the privacy of your own home. And it's a vertical path. Religion is all horizontal. It's very necessary because it helps us to unite and to bring community, to give meaning to life, and to give higher purpose to society. But it's not transformative. Spirituality is transformational. It's vertical movement. And it's all about doing spiritual practice. That is what we call yoga. And in Vedanta, if you want to make a one-word definition of spirituality, we could just say it's yoga. That is, it's spiritual practice. And spiritual practice is the goal of spiritual practice is not salvation. Rather, it's liberation of the self. The goal of spiritual practice is to become liberated from your illusions, from your false beliefs about who you really are. So we can discriminate these two words, religion and spirituality. Let's look at another two words. Morality and spirituality. Now, when we talk about morality, morality is just all about the good, doing the right thing. The right thing is what leads to the good. We all know what's good. We have an intuition within our own mind and heart of what is good. And so we know instinctively, intuitively what is good, but also we're informed by scriptures and by religion. And we know that what is good, well, that means if we follow the 10 Commandments, and if we avoid the 7 deadly sins, and if you have a clean record in society, you're considered to be a moral, good, upstanding citizen. That's all that's required. But morality is not enough for spirituality. Moralism is not spirituality. Spirituality, that is the moral virtues and spiritual virtues. You're acquainted now, you know very well what are moral virtues. Usually they're defined in negative terms. Spiritual virtues are defined in positive terms and represent a higher standard than morality. Both morality and spirituality virtues are forms of renunciation. That's why they're both necessary. And in fact, we can say they go together like a bud. Like take a plant, there's a bud, and then there's the leaves, and then there's the flower. First comes the one. First the bud has to form, and then slowly the flower will blossom and bloom. So first morality, then spirituality, two different forms, so both forms of renunciation. So we can't avoid renunciation. But we begin with where we are and begin to raise our standards. So these two words they go together. Well, they're kind of like religion and spirituality. Also, those words also, we say we can distinguish them, but really, it's better to think of them maybe if you visualize concentric circles. And the exoteric part, the outer circles, maybe is what we mean by conventional religion, whereas the inner circles are what we mean by mysticism or spirituality. And so the one is more esoteric, the other is more exoteric. And the analogy usually is that of the pearl and the oyster shell. This is the spirituality, and the religion. So the two go together. Similarly, it is morality and spirituality. It's as you know, in yoga, Patanjali's yoga aphorisms, the yama and the niyamas, they're both. They begin there with some basic moral injunctions, and then go on to those which are more advanced, we can say. They're virtues that are associated in Christianity with mysticism. And maybe we could call Raja Yoga as Hindu mysticism. It's just a form of mysticism. If by mysticism we mean, simplistic definition as of that is seeking out our personal experience of the one, becoming one with our own true nature. So our question is, what is spirituality? So we can see that sometimes it's helpful for us to discriminate some terms, get clearer between the being moral. It's not enough to be moral. You can't just be a good person. A good person is not enough. It's not enough to you want to become a godly person. It's not enough for you to do good works. You have to do karma yoga. That's a whole different level of spiritual practice. The two go together. It's like the bud and the flower. One is necessary, but it's helpful for us to discriminate the two so that we can keep the ideal clear in our minds. That's a lot of our purpose here when we think here about soul, God, and religion. Our minds are at flying at a higher level. It's so that we can help to clarify our ideals. We want to keep our ideals clear, even though we may fall far short of those ideals. Helpful for us to have the ideal clear in our mind. Let's discriminate a third pair of confusables. And, well, maybe for some people. And that is New Age spirituality and Vedanta spirituality. Let's contrast those two. Now, the New Age, as you know, was part of the counterculture movement in America in the 1960s. And it envisioned, New Age means that they envision a glorious new age of Aquarius, a utopian vision where everyone will be on the road to enlightenment. And we will all live together in peace and in harmony with each other and with nature. This is their vision, the New Age. And in pursuit of that, they embraced many different forms of self-development and religious, spiritual practices, opened the door to all the wisdom of the East and all the religions of the East. The only thing that they rejected outright was Christian morality and capitalism. You get rid of those two things. The rest, everything else, is thrown into the bag. And sometimes it was referred to as psycho-spirituality. That means kind of a merging of a lot of human potential movement in psychology with spiritual disciplines of all different religions. And it was very eclectic. It was all embracing. But they had no philosophy. They embraced diversity, but they had no unity. Now let's look at Vedanta spirituality. Vedanta is, what Vedanta is a philosophy and a religion that teaches us about unity in diversity. It's a philosophy that grounds all forms of morality and spiritual practice and religious practices, and that harmonizes all different forms of religion and personal growth. And so, therefore, in many ways, it's kind of the fulfillment, or it's the foundation, or it's the grounding of unity that enables us to give a global map of where everything is at. It gives us principles. It gives us hierarchy so that we can understand the deeper unity behind it. And so this is why I would suggest that Vedanta spirituality is the most all-inclusive and the most comprehensive. The Vedanta philosophy and religion, that is all different forms of yoga sadhana, it's the most comprehensive way of understanding our question this morning, that is, what is spirituality?
Power Thank you to Swami Vedarupananda for his very clear and satisfying talk, helping us to understand the idea of spirituality. Swami Vedarupananda stays in South Pasadena at our Vivekananda house, the house where Vivekananda himself stayed in 1900. I'd like to wish all of you, especially the fathers among us, a happy Father's Day, and honor the sacrifice made by our fathers for us. Next week, our speaker will be Swami Medhananda, and his topic, Sri Ramakrishna's jokes. It's going to be an interesting talk. Sri Ramakrishna was full of fun, and he's going to see how Sri Ramakrishna used his jokes to teach. And we also have, after that, we have before that, we have Swami Yogatmananda, who is head of our Vedanta Society in Providence. He'll be visiting us next week. So please see if you can come hear him speak. He'll be speaking here on Thursday night at 7:30, and his topic is, Let Us Be Practical. And then he's giving a retreat in Santa Barbara from 10:30 to 3 on Saturday the 24th on Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. So that's from 10:30 to 3 on Saturday, the 24th. Lunch will be provided, although you're also welcome to bring your own food. And that promises to be very interesting. Then on the Sunday, the 25th, he'll be speaking in Santa Barbara also on the open secret. So that's a special visit of Swami Yogatmananda. And after that, Swami Kripa Mayananda will be visiting. He's in charge of our center in Toronto. So that's about it. If this is your first time here, a warm welcome to you. Our bookshop is open after the talk. There are refreshments, and after grabbing some refreshments, the Swami Vedarupananda will be in the living room next to the bookshop to take your questions, and as he says, your objections. So thank you for coming.
Om Dyo Shanti Antariksha Shanti Prithivi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarava Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sa Me Shantiredhi Om Shanti 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 Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. Yes, join us for questions or your commentary in the green room immediately afterwards.